thanks for coming out tonight and spending some time with us. And I'm very excited. This is one of my favorite lessons I teach. And like last night, I just want to let you know, this is a pretty small group, so we can do some interaction, some interchange. If you need some clarity during it, don't be afraid to like, hey, what did you just say? I don't get it. Or even like, I don't agree with that, or tell me why you would say that. Feel free to do that, okay?
No, I don't agree with that either.
Except you. And this kind of group over here, listen, I was an educator for 33 years. You guys don't intimidate me a bit. I can send you out in the hallway, drop of a hat. Got my principal right here. Every group has them, so. So yeah, do you want this to be interactive? I don't know how long it'll go. When people start nodding off, that's when I kind of like slow things down. But yeah, I bring you greetings from Denver. I've been there like 20 years, great church and all that. But I really enjoyed coming up to Alaska. It's my third time up here. My wife was really worried the first time I came out. She's like, oh great, here we go again. We're moving to Alaska now.
Come on.
And I'm always coming home like, baby, we got to go to Colorado. No, you know. So what I want to do tonight, so some of you guys, or many of you have been around the churches a long time, right? Like it's been 30 years, 20 years, that kind of thing. And we've developed a culture in our churches. And one of those cultures is like, once you become a Christian, you're like perfect guy, you're doing really good. It'd be really unusual that people would struggle because once you become a Christian, everything's good to go, right? And then we all got to be over 20 years old, like, wait a minute, this is not working out well, right? And we struggle. And we are part of a messy group of people.
Yep.
And that's just who we are. It's who everybody else around the world is. We happen to be a little more honest about it.
Yep.
You know, we happen to be upfront, like, yeah, I want to be different. So we're not different than anybody else in that sense. Everybody struggles with stuff, guys. What I want to do tonight is just talk about some things that I think help us to connect to each other in ways that are more effective. As a counselor, it's one of the biggest parts of my job is I had to learn how to quickly connect to people and get something done in an effective way. And so obviously, like Shane said, man, Jesus is like the best of this stuff. I read the other day, I don't know where I read it, but it said that Jesus, most of what he taught was because somebody ran up to him with a question. Like he was such that people would just feel safe around him. And they would come up, running up like, hey, what do I got to do to get eternal life, guy? Come on. Like really big questions that he would teach, right? So there's something about this man that drew people to him. Even in his weakness, Jesus said, when I am lifted up, the weakest moment of his life, what will I do? I draw all men to myself. Like even in his weakness, he brought people into him. Isn't that what attracts you to Jesus? The weakness of Jesus. The fact that this guy would die on a cross for me is what pulls me into his life. Okay? So we're going to examine some of that tonight. So let's get going here. This will be fun. It's one of my favorites. If you want, I've got a website called inmotioncounseling.org. We post blogs on it. You can sign up for a like a monthly or bi-weekly blog that I send out. My passion is mental health in the church setting. That's what I love to do. I think churches are amazing places to live our lives together, whatever our lives represent. Church is a great community for that. I think it's one of the most attractive things to people is our dealing with our mess in church. We have more visitors coming to our grief groups in Denver now than we have Christians coming, which is pretty cool. We love when visitors come to our recovery ministry because they get to see Christians struggling and going to God for their struggles. When I lived in Dallas, Dallas has a Church of Christ on every corner, like they're everywhere, like bugs. And I would like invite people to church and I'd be like, yeah, we got elders, we got 9,000 people that come, look at this, look at this. They're like, no, I already got church. And I couldn't convince people to come. Then I started realizing like everybody's got their church. Then I started sharing with people my weaknesses. I was like, yeah, I'm really struggling with this impurity issue, and I got brothers that are helping me. They're like, really? What do you mean you got brothers helping you? I'm like, well, at my church we have these groups, and really? What's the name of your church? Can I go to it? I noticed when I shared my weakness with people, they wanted to come. So, anyways, inmotioncounseling.org. Got a great guy that's running my website for me now. Rocket Media. Is that Rocket Media?
Media Rocket.
Media Rocket, whatever. So let me ask you guys a question.
Need a mortgage?
What do the members of the Anchorage Church struggle with? Just quickly, like what are some of the things you've noticed over the years? What are the kind of things you have?
Just I can do it myself attitude. Kind of like
I was gonna say the same thing, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
Autocracy.
Like a real independence.
Yeah.
Independence.
No, independence, yeah, like mentality where it's just like, not really anybody else, you guys figure it out, thank you very much.
Well, yeah.
Kind of thing, yeah.
A good question to ask is how's that working for you?
No, honestly, the question is like our relationships, yeah.
Yeah. Good point. As social beings, we're not meant to do that very much.
No.
We're meant to be with one another, right?
Yeah.
What else do you guys see?
Depression.
In the wintertime mostly, or just all over the
Yeah,
place?
wintertime.
Yeah.
Darkness.
That's a hard one, guys. It's hard when you have a friend, you watch them go downhill like that. It's really difficult. What else do people here struggle with?
Extreme loneliness.
And how do you see that like different than depression?
You might be engaged, but you don't feel connected.
You ever been to church around a ton of people and you feel lonely?
Yeah.
I have. I've been there like looking around like, what am I supposed to do here? Yeah, what else do people here struggle with?
Midlife crisis. Of all sorts.
Yeah. I called my wife once, she's in China, and I was like, hey baby, I said, tell you what, either I get a new bathroom or I buy a red sports car, which one do you want me to do? She goes, get a new bathroom.
Yeah.
So I went upstairs and demolished my bathroom, redid the whole thing. That was my midlife crisis. It's a lot cheaper than a sports car.
Well, I'm gonna have a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's really funny.
Yeah, marital issues in this church.
Good luck with that, buddy.
Can't help you.
So we have all manner of struggles in the church. And honestly, right, you're no different than any other church. Like, I do this stuff all over the world, and the same things are over and over again. Sometimes they're a little specific to your culture. Like I think the independence piece, we see that in Denver. Denver's the West, it's very independent out there. So sometimes there's cultural things that go on. But there you go. So we all have struggles. Now here's the thing, in the old days we used to say, brother, just get rid of your struggles and come on, let's move on, let's go knock on doors or whatever. Just stop it, stop. Let me tell you what to do, right? And we know that just can't solve a ton of things. But what does solve is person-to-person interaction. Okay? And I know that not all of us want to be like counselors or professional counselors or therapists. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do. But there's a level that we can get to of better connection with one another. I'm always working on my ability to connect to another person. That's something I always work on for years and years until the day I die. I want to work on how do I better connect. So that's something we all do. I've talked about this, helping the weak by being weak. You know, I talked about Jesus did it, and then Paul did it, like.
Yeah.
In 1 and 2 Corinthians, 12 times he said, I'm weak. He was sent there, he wrote that letter to change the church. It was a messed up church, right? The guy was sleeping with his mother-in-law. I mean, there was some crazy stuff happening. So Paul doesn't go in there just like throw down the gavel, like, okay, here we go, boys. He comes in the first or second chapter, I think he said, I'm so afraid I'm trembling in front of you. Like, what would you do if I came up here like crying and sweating and like falling down on the floor? I don't want to talk to you guys, I'm just too scared. You'd be like, go get some more pizza or something, right? I mean, Paul modeled weakness that he learned from Jesus. 2 Corinthians 13:4 says, Jesus was crucified in weakness. He modeled it for people. He showed people that when we're weak with one another, we can be really strong. He really meant that, by the way. Later on, he said, when you're weak, we're strong, right? That's not just a little thing you put up on the wall. Paul was serious. He goes, hey guys, when we're weak, that's where we find our greatest strength. So there's a connection piece on that we're going to talk about tonight. one of the things I've learned in my groups that we lead, especially the grief group, is vulnerability connects us to one another. It's really interesting. In grief, you have to be vulnerable. You're like exposed in your soul to the core. There's nothing worse that's happened than what your loss has been. And you're still breathing. And then we get 8 people together talking about that. And it's the most powerful group of people I've ever been with in my life when we do these grief groups. Because these are people that have been knocked down and they're sitting there like, I ain't going anywhere. God, we're going to get this thing worked out. So there's a vulnerability that happens when we connect with one another. And we'll talk about that in just a moment some more. You guys have heard of empathy. What is empathy? Like, what's the famous term for it? What is it?
Walk a mile in somebody's shoes.
Yeah, walk a mile in someone's shoes. What else? What are the other ways of saying that? You kind of like feel what they feel. Like you're kind of like alongside somebody, right? I think that's well said. Walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So empathy is one of those things that is how we connect to one another. It's perspective taking without judgment. So in other words, what you're trying to do is understand somebody else's perspective without judging them. Now that's not easy to do with Christians, right? Because we can be pretty judgmental people at times. I struggle with judgment in my heart. I've learned years ago how not to say judgment to people. Like that didn't go well, so I quit doing that. But I struggle with it in my heart. Like sometimes my first thought is judgmental, and I'm like, Tim, you're a dog. Like I talk to myself, you're a dog. Why did you just think that? So but it's perspective taking without judging somebody. In other words, you're trying to figure out what's it like in your shoes, period. I don't have a judgment on it. In grief, we don't judge people in their grief journey. We tell people each of your journeys is independent for you. It's your unique journey. And then it's also there's an emotional side to it. It's communicating with emotion. So I want to watch a quick video here. You all know who Brene Brown is. So this is a little 2-minute clip on empathy. And some of you guys have probably seen this before, but always
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
And I'll tell you why Brene Brown is so popular and good. What she does is she does the dirty work of research. She is a researcher to the core. And that woman, I watch some of the stuff she does. She does the hard work. She's not just piggybacking on other people's knowledge. She's getting in there creating very innovative work. And that's why she's connected like so well with people. So that's what I want to talk about the rest of the night is how do we connect to people in ways that are effective and that help them to move along in their progress, whatever they're doing. So let me ask you this question now. What were you like when you were 12 years old?
Cool.
You're a liar.
Terrible.
You're not cool. Did you say cool?
No.
Oh, good. I thought you said cool.
No, I said whole.
Oh.
I was a little monster.
Were you? Okay.
Yeah.
We can all imagine, right? 12 years old, what were you like?
I was a mess.
A mess.
Very shy and fearful.
Aw, were you? Can't imagine that.
I was silly, naive, a lot of naivety.
Yeah.
I was a caregiver
At 12?
to my siblings.
Oh, but there's a story behind that.
Kinda.
Yeah.
Trying to figure myself out.
Yeah.
I lived in a predominantly Caucasian school, and I still just try to figure myself out. Where do I belong?
Yeah. Who am I in this environment? Yeah, identity is the number one job for a 12-year-old. That's what they're trying to do is figure out what's going on. Who am I? Most of us didn't have much going on at 12. We weren't even brushing our teeth yet, honestly. Right? I was a middle school counselor for a couple of years. I'm like, dude, you didn't brush your teeth today. They're like, yeah, I forgot, sorry. I mean, really, 12 years old, we just don't have a lot going on.
Yeah.
And, but not Jesus. He's different at 12. So I need somebody to stand up and read this for me. Nice, big, powerful voice. Anybody want to read this verse for me? You will? Who will? Oh, thank you, bro.
I guess I will.
Thank you very much.
Stand up and read it? All right, I'll stand up.
No, just nice.
All right.
Voice.
After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers.
Thank you very much. So you guys know the story, right? So 12 years old, Jesus goes to Jerusalem with his mom and dad and his whole big family, cousins and stuff all over the place, right? So they did it. And some people say up to 1 million people were in Jerusalem at the time. It's packed. It was busy. There's dust everywhere. There's people doing all sorts. You guys have been to seminars, right? It's kind of like that, outdoors sort of. And so then they're on their way home, and a day or so into the journey, Mary looks at Joseph and goes, hey, where's Jesus? And he's like, it was your turn to watch him. No, it wasn't. It's your turn. They get in this big fight with each other. And all of a sudden they're like, where is he? He's not here. They go running around the caravan, trying to hunt him down. Nobody's seen him. They turn around, go all the way back to Jerusalem, and then they spend 3 days looking for him. You can imagine the panic in Mary and Joseph's lives.
We lost the Savior.
I know. And they kind of knew, Mary kind of knew, like, she had treasured stuff in her heart. She kind of knew, like, this is a special boy. They weren't quite sure. Jesus wasn't even quite sure. Some people say this is kind of the moments where he was starting to realize, like, oh, all those Old Testament things we read in the synagogue are about me.
Wow.
You imagine a 12-year-old boy trying to realize I'm the Savior of the world. God has squeezed himself into my little body, right? They finally find him after 3 days, and he's sitting in these temple courts with all the smartest men in the city, the most intimidating scholars of the city. And he's sitting there, and what's he doing? Is he playing marbles, riding his little tricycle around? He's sitting there, and he's doing a couple things. He's listening to the elders. He's listening. He's not talking. He listens to them as they debated and talked about the ins and outs of the law. He's listening. He's trying to figure it out. He's trying to put things together. And then he's asking them questions. And the Bible says something interesting. It says his parents were astonished at his understanding. They were astonished because he was an amazing listener and he asked relevant, heartfelt questions that moved the conversation in a new direction. He had understanding they were astonished at. Now my parents were astonished at me, but it wasn't because of any of my understanding. They were astonished that I was even alive at age 12. So I want to talk about this for a few minutes. First of all, we're not good at listening, okay? We're just as humans, we're just not. That one time Jesus took Peter, James, and John up on the Mount of Transfiguration. Remember that?
Yep.
They go up there, and what's Peter do? He starts talking like, hey, we ought to build some huts over here. One of the Gospels says he didn't know what he was saying, in parentheses, like, shut up, Peter, you don't know what you're talking about. So he does that, and they're all confused, and then this cloud comes over and settles upon them, and God goes, hey, this is my son whom I love.
Listen to him.
Listen to him. 771 times in the Bible you'll see the word hear and listen.
Wow.
Jesus would have to say, verily, verily, I say unto you. Basically he's saying, please be quiet. I'm getting ready to say something really important. Like he would have to preamble his statements at times because people weren't listening. We're typically not good at listening. So I want to watch a quick little video here on Brian Regan. He's talking about the me monster, okay? He's talking about the challenge that we feel in our hearts to listen. Because we typically want to talk, right? So let's watch the me monster here.
I'm actually kind of quiet off stage. A lot of people don't realize that. I was at a dinner party recently. A bunch of people that I don't know. One guy talking plenty for everybody. Me, myself, right, and then I, and then myself, right, me. I couldn't tell this one about I, because I was talking about myself, and then me. Beware the me monster. So I tried to jump in with a little story. I don't want to just sit there the whole night. Right when I'm done with my story, this guy goes, that ain't nothing. Didn't mean to waste everybody's time. Telling my nothing story. Here, let Marco Polo speak. He's back with tales of adventure. My story ain't nothing. Maybe it wasn't, because I made the mistake of trying to tell a story about having only 2 wisdom teeth pulled, and I learned a lesson. Don't ever try to tell a 2 wisdom tooth story, because you ain't going nowhere. The 4 wisdom teeth people are going to parachute in and cut you off at the pass. Halt with your 2 wisdom tooth tail. You will never complete one, trust me. I'm trying to tell my story. You know, I had some wisdom teeth pulled. I had 4 pulled. Oh, okay. No 5, no 9. I had 9 wisdom teeth pulled. All of mine were impacted. They were all coming upside down. The roots were up on my tongue, coming out my nose. They were tusks. I was a warthog. No anesthesia. They pulled them out with pliers. I was eating corn on the cob that afternoon. Pin the blue ribbon upon his chest. That knocks the socks off of my wisdom tooth tail. Why do people need to top other people? I've never understood it, and I see it all the time. Obviously, people get something out of it. At best, people wait for your lips to stop. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you me! You me! You see the difference? You see that? Now I do. What is it about the human condition? People get something out of that. That's why I have a social fantasy I wish I was one of the 12 astronauts who have been on our moon. They must love knowing they can be anybody's story whenever they want. They can sit back quietly at a dinner party while some other person, some me monster's doing his thing, and let him go. Let him run with the line while you be quiet. Oh, really? Let him have his moment. Yeah, I'm a big traveler. I have my business all. I got my own global enterprise I got to check on. You know, I'm driving the Autobahn because I keep a fleet of sports cars over in Zurich. And I get a little Swiss account there to check it. Mount Kilimanjaro expedition might have to cancel that. You know, runways in Aspen are a lot shorter the first time you go in there. The Pacific Rim Company is going to try to take that over. Global enterprise. I walked on the moon. Well, you have the floor, Moonwalker. You know, you mentioned driving on the Autobahn. That reminded me. Once I was driving in the Sea of Tranquility. In my lunar rover. And I too was worried about our speed until I remembered why. We're the only ones on the moon.
That's awesome.
That's funny.
That is one of the most convicting things. I've seen that 100 times. I actually used to do the wisdom teeth thing. Before I saw that, I used to tell people, yeah, I got, and they, you know, fired it out, and I'm trying to impress people. They're like, whatever. And then I saw that, I'm like, shut up, Joe. Stupid wisdom teeth. So I want to go through some ideas of what it takes to be an effective listener. Okay, these are scriptural and they're research based. So the first thing is being a great listener takes humility. James 1:19 says to be quick to listen and slow to speak, right? Mm-hmm. Where did James learn that from? Who taught him that?
His brother Jesus.
Who said that? Yeah, he grew up in a home with his big brother Jesus. Mm. So when James penned that book, the book of James, he had watched Jesus listen to his parents. Mm. He watched Jesus listen to his uncles and aunts and the tradesmen of the town that he lived in. He watched Jesus listen in the synagogue. So James, by the time he wrote this book, he's like, I know all about listening. You gotta be quick to listen. Jesus was a quick listener. You know, he learned that growing up. Here's the thing, guys, when you listen with humility, we realize that there's two hearts on display in listening. There's the heart of the person speaking, but there's also the heart of the listener. There's two hearts that are on display there. We always think, well, the heart of the person that I'm helping, that's the main thing, right? But really, both hearts are on display. When you're listening, your heart's being kind of shown for what it might be. Okay, so humility is huge. We take, in counseling, we take a position of what we call not knowing. So when I'm with a client, my position with that client is, I don't know. Like, I'm here to learn from you, client. Instead of like, I'm the counselor, you know, I'm kind of here to fix you up. We call it leading from one step behind. In other words, a client is a person that leads our conversation. Mm-hmm. I'm there as a facilitator, as a listener. I'm there to listen for clues and to move the conversation forward. But the authority isn't in my hands, it's in the hands of my client. So there's a position of not knowing that I think is really important when we listen. Taking that humility piece. That was one of the biggest problems, right, with our movement before. I mean, there were like 19-year-old kids discipling 40-year-old people. Like, I remember that, like, okay, something wrong with that. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with it, but it doesn't seem right. We just had this idea that because people had a certain position and they knew things. Taking a position of humility as we meet with people is really important. One of the best questions I ask people is, I'm curious about this. You said this, I'm curious what you mean by that. Can you help me understand that? Those are some of the most important questions we ever ask. Help me understand what you just meant by that. Well, I grew up in a dysfunctional home, so I can't do that. Can you help me understand that? Like, what's that mean? Growing up in a dysfunctional home, I don't quite know what that means for you. Those kinds of questions where you have this sense of not knowing can really help people open up their hearts. So a humble listener, now the opposite of a humble listener is distracted, eyes are going everywhere, thinking about their next appointment. Have you ever been with somebody and you're thinking at the time of what you want to say as they're talking? Like, people know that, right? We've all done that before. You're not present when you do that. Like, you're thinking about how am I going to respond to this as the person's talking to you. So there's this sense of emptying yourself out, being present with people. That's why meditation can be so important for us, to practice meditation as a lifestyle, because we learn to kind of pull ourselves down, especially when people are sharing traumatic events with you, or they're sharing things that are personally. That's one of the challenges of being in the church, is because this person's sharing with me, but we're also like good friends, right? He's my buddy. We've been together in the same church for 20 years, but he's sharing things that are really difficult for me to hear, and I get triggered. And he's saying things that I want to fix or respond to. So meditation, we talk about this tomorrow at church, meditation can really help you learn to pull yourself down and quiet yourself as people are sharing really difficult things. It's powerful. When people can sit with you and they can share the kind of the most raw parts of their life, and you don't react. You just kind of take it, you kind of let it come in. That's empathy. That's an empathic response. When you kind of let it come in, you can even feel some of it. That must have been really hard for you. Can you tell me more about that? Can you help me understand what that was like for you? So one of the great things about listening is be humble. Be a humble listener. Any questions about that or anything up to this point so far that I can answer, or maybe thoughts you have?
When you say be humble, what do you mean by that?
So my tendency is I want to fix people. I want to kind of short circuit it so we can move on. And that's not very humble. Being humble would be like, I want to enter your world. Like, I'm trying to enter your world and understand what's it like as you're telling me whatever the issue is. What's it like for you? Carl Rogers once said, he talked about counseling, and he talked about it, the ability to go into the bizarre world of another person and stay in there long enough to kind of like understand and then walk back out of it and be back in your own world. There's a sense of humility of, it was easy for me in a sense in high school, I was a school counselor for many years. So these are like 16-year-old kids, like, okay, But even then, to like, try to understand, like, okay, you lost your first girlfriend, sorry to hear that, kind of thing. There's gonna be dozens more, buddy, kind of feeling to it. But then I forgot, like, oh yeah, for this person, this human in front of me, it's a disaster. His life's a disaster right now. He can't see past what happened. So humility is my ability to walk into that kind of world of his, for those moments, feel what he feels, hurt with him, and then help him by asking questions to progress further. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm really grateful, because what I hear is like how important it is to take me out of the conversation and whatever thoughts that I have. And one of the things that you shared about position with a client is that, like, I don't know. Like, that seems like a good pathway for me to not kind of conclude about them in any way or cause a judgment. And then it helped me to better understand too a portion that you wrote about patiently loving. Because I could still, like, I could walk into a time with somebody, like, this is where I want to be, like, this is going to be great, like at work or, you know, with bros or I don't know. But it's like during the conversation, I could still get triggered to like go back to me for whatever reason. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is true for our spouses, right? My spouse, you know, not my spouse, you know. my wife Jackie. We're super connected, right? We're integrated with one another, so we can trigger each other pretty easily in some ways. So just having that space to be humble with her is really important. So here's another one: seek to understand. Like, seek to understand people. It's vital. Again, it's like that perspective taking. Like, I want to know your world. And so one of the most important things with understanding people is you got to do it without judgment. So here's an example. I'm in my office and a kid comes in, and I always tell the kids, like, hey, listen, everything you and I talk about is perfectly safe. I'll never tell your parents about it. Just to let you know. You can be open with me. And so sometimes they are. They're like, yeah, I got really drunk last weekend, Mr. Summerlin. Stole my mom's car, had sex in the back seat, we smoked a bunch of pot. I mean, they're just like telling me stuff, right? And I just sit there and kind of like not judge it. Like I park my judgment. That's what I call it. I park judgment in the back of my head. In other words, I'm there just to pull it all in, let you talk as much as you want. And so it's important to park judgment. Sometimes what we do is we judge things right away, and we might even make a right judgment. But we judge it right away, and then we tell the person the answer. So if this kid's like, yeah, I got really drunk last week and stole my mom's car, my tendency is like, dude, you get caught doing that. Like, you get arrested for that. Or, what are you thinking here? You get car wrecks. And those are true judgments, aren't they? They're right, spot on. But what we want to do is park those things for a while. Because what would happen if I started kind of giving the kid the
Shut down.
Yeah, he just shuts down. He's like, yeah. One kid called me, you're like my third parent, Mr. Summerlin. That's not my goal to be your third parent, okay? So what I do is I park the judgment until I feel like somebody's emptied themselves out. Until I feel like they've done enough to be on their pathway to a new place. Now, what do we do with something that we park? We eventually unpark it. So the next day I might run into that kid in the hallway and say, hey, by the way, I've been thinking about what you shared with me yesterday. Can you come to my office? And I'll sit down and do the dad talk with him, like, buddy, and we'll have a good talk about your life and where you're headed to and what's your motivation and what are the dangers of stealing your parents' cars and things like this. We'll have that talk eventually, but I wait until I get this kid to open all the way up. So sometimes people sit down like in discipling times or something, and they start sharing stuff, and right away you're thinking, okay, I got to get the scriptures out, I got to do this, I got to move him along. And we haven't heard the whole story yet. Okay, so we want to seek to understand people. It's vital that we do that. Was Proverbs 18 Proverbs 18, to answer before listening, that's folly and shame. I love that. Proverbs get right to it, don't they?
Yeah.
They don't keep you guessing on what they mean. Like, to answer before listening, it's just stupid, is what he basically says. That's just stupid. Don't do that. Don't do that to people. Now, here's another thing that's really important, I think, is when you listen well, you can start identifying lies and hurts in people's lives. Isn't that what drives us in many ways? Think about it for a second. Satan is our enemy, right? What's his number one tool against us? Yeah, he's lies. Jesus said it, he goes, that guy's a father of all lies. He goes, Jesus is so good. He goes, even his native language is lying. He just hammered them, right? Satan's greatest tool against Christians and against people, against the world, against nations, is lying to them. So what happens is we start hearing lies as kids, and then we actually start living our lives based on those lies. So I see it all the time. I'll be talking to some guy who's 70 years old. He's still working full time at a job. He's already got a huge, massive house, bunch of cars. He's rich, filthy rich, and he's still climbing the ladder. I'm like, you've got everything you need. And when you drill down a few minutes, I'm trying to prove to my dad that I'm somebody. His dad's been dead for 20 years. Wow. And he's still trying to prove. I'm like, that you believed a lie somewhere, and now you live your life based on that lie. And it's just a path of damage in the pathway, right? So that's what we do, is we live our lives based on lies. And the whole idea behind the scriptures is You open the scriptures and you're like, it refutes lies. You've done that before with books in the Bible or a story in the Bible. You're like, oh, there it is. Like, oh my gosh. You tell your best friend, I can't believe I just read this thing. And that's what it is. When those lights go off, basically it's God revealing truth to you to refute lies in your life. Or to see hurts. You know, when we have a good conversation, you ever have a really good conversation, all of a sudden the tears start coming? I've had those before where it's just like a regular conversation, then they ask me a question. And then the tears start to show up. I'm like, oh my gosh, my heart's getting open here. Good listeners listen for lies. If you have a good listening ear, you're going to hear people talk about lies in their life. They don't even know they're talking about it. They'll say things, you'll be like, wait, what did you just say? It's one of the best questions to ask people, by the way, is to say, wait, what? 2 words, wait, what? I was in a D group one time, and our minister was in the D group, and I was like this regular Joe. But I was doing this big class on the cross. I was really into the cross. And in the D group, one of the other brothers said, guys, I sinned yesterday. I don't even know if I'm a Christian anymore. And my minister let it go. And I just go, wait, what? I said, so what we're saying in this group is because Todd sinned yesterday, that he's not a Christian? Is that what we're talking about here? What's going on? And my minister was like, he was like, slow down, Tim, because I was getting all riled up, right? That was a lie the man had believed, that somehow when you sin, you lose your salvation. I don't even know what the sin was, but I said, that's not, what's that say about the cross, you guys? If somehow the cross is limited, that when we sin, we don't get saved anymore until like something happens the next day. You'll hear people do that if you're listening well. You'll hear people say things, and when you're having your quiet time and you're kind of like in there with God and you're doing well spiritually, you'll pick up, the Spirit of God will pick those things up for you. And you'll hear it and just say, wait, what? And it's really funny. Sometimes when you say, wait, what? And they retell you, they're like, oh, shoot. And we had a guy in my recovery ministry once. We had these little groups of 3 people afterwards. And we have these discussions. And he said something like, he goes like, I'm not all that sure God's that concerned about pornography. And as soon as he said, he goes, oh, shoot. Like there's something about verbalizing the words out of his mouth, because we gave him this really safe spot, right? Like you're allowed to say anything you want to say. And when he said it, he's like, oh, shoot, I need help, you guys. Like sometimes when you ask people to repeat something, they hear themselves say it again.
Yeah.
And that can be super powerful. So when we listen, we seek to understand, but we're also listening to identify lies and hurts in people's lives. Look for the corners of people's eyes when they talk. Listen for emotion. If you see the lips quiver a little bit or a tear. I remember one time we were in a D group with Douglas and Vicky Jacoby in England. We were like these young and dumb intern people. And we were talking. I'm like, fired up and all this. And my wife's over there crying. And Douglas goes, Jackie, what's behind those tears? And I'm like, who are you? You're like Jesus in the flesh. Like my wife's bawling. And just that one question, what's behind those tears, Jackie? And then we had this amazing conversation about, like, listen for people's hurts. Don't disciple their hurts. Explore them. Sometimes you shouldn't feel that way about your dad. Bible says respect your dad. You shouldn't feel that way about him. Don't do that to people. Explore the hurt. Tell me about that. Tell me more about your dad, whatever the case might be. And then finally, patiently love and hold the moment. So I'm going to finish out the listening part here right now. When I say hold the moment, I learned this in grief. We had a young man commit suicide in Denver several years ago, and his mom and dad are just lifelong disciples, great people, pillars in the church, and they've given me permission to talk about this. But after he died, their Bible talk leader called me and goes, Tim, we don't know what to do in Bible talk, because we don't know, should we keep talking about this loss they have? Should we just move on? So I came and did this social grief Bible talk for them, and they were there. Rachel and Walter, the parents were there. I didn't think they were coming. So I did the Bible talk, and then Rachel came up to me afterwards, and she's just bawling. And this was about maybe just 4 or 5 weeks after Nick died. And she said, Tim, I need Nick to come back. Nick needs to come home. And she's just bawling, right? And I didn't know what to do. What do you think my temptation was as she was saying things like that?
Fix it somehow.
Console, say everything will be fine.
Yeah, I could have done that. I mean, I could have got a little bit harder to say, Rachel, Nick's not coming home. You know what I'm saying? That's a truthful statement. But I knew enough to just hold on to her emotion for 20 minutes. And it's really interesting, as I stood with her and I started crying as well, because I knew Nick. What happened was she morphed from her irrational thinking into very rational thought. She finally got to a place where she's like, I just miss my son. I don't know how to live my life without him. And it became very rational, constructive conversation. But I learned a lesson that we've got to learn to hold on to people's emotional moments. Because our tendency is to go in there and try to fix them. We want to say something in order to get them better. And so being a good listener is also learning, and again, this is why I think meditation is so important. To learn how to hold on to people's stuff with them. And just patiently be with them for a while. Does that make sense? That idea of holding on to moments like that? All right. Any questions or thoughts or anything? We're gonna wind this thing down
Can
here.
you explain the correlation of the meditation, why that helps?
You bet. So you know, we have the part of our brain, it's a fight, flight, or freeze part, right? It's a defensive mechanism we have that God gave to us so that we can stay safe. So, and what happens is we access that quickly. And so we'll do things. Has your wife ever triggered you and you come right back at her?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I thought. Everybody else like, I can't relate to that. You know, right? People do that. Maybe people trigger us in different ways. Certainly when Rachel was being that way with me, it was triggering the heck out of me with my mom and losses I've seen over the years and things. And because I just care for Rachel, I wanted her to feel better now. Like, I don't want to see her stand there and just emote like that. It was hard to be with her. So I think what meditation does and spiritual practices do, taking your Sabbath, it teaches us to pull down, is one of the best ways I can describe it, and to not access that part of our brains. I shared last night about Jesus doing that, where he just would pause and instead of react to people, he would pause and scribble in the dirt, kind of thing, right? So I think just meditating, and I think what it does is it trains us when we're not meditating how to have space. So it's one thing when you're meditating, like, leave me alone, I'm doing my meditation, that's one thing. But then afterwards, when you go to work or whatever, or your kid falls apart or something, when you're not meditating, that's when you see, is it working? Is it benefiting me now? So we learn to be able to, you know, just to pull back and be patient with people, to be calm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to finish up with Jesus asking questions, okay? Now, I've done a lot of study on this. One's amazing to me. As a counselor, it's amazing. You read the New Testament, you go, how did Jesus affect the changes he affected? How did he do that? Remember, he was 100% human. He wasn't like this magician that just kind of like, bing. You know, Judy comes up to me and asks me this really hard question. It's like, bing. And she goes, oh, I'm better now. That wasn't who he was, I don't believe. I believe Jesus knew how to ask the right question to the right people at the right time in such a way that it affects change. So I studied his questions a lot. And I've come up with 6 different kinds of questions he asked. I'm only gonna do one tonight. Everybody's like, oh, good. But I've come up with like 6 categories of kinds of questions he would ask. Like one would be like a grace-filled question. Jesus would often ask questions that push people back to their moments of grace in their life. Okay? So he would ask questions that people would recall, oh yeah, God's already done this in my life before. He'd ask those kinds of questions. But what is it about questions that you think make a difference in your life? Think about your own life when somebody's asked you a good question. What is it about them that help you?
I think it gets out of your just autopilot and affects you in a way where you have to access something a little deeper.
So it pushes you inside a bit?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I've been actually reading a new book saying thinking slow and fast. And it talks about these 2 systems that you're talking about. One is automatic, your fight or flight. The other one is the thought process, the thinking rush. And I think when you ask a question, you have to stop and think, what did they just say? So you have to, you're working on your system too, rather than your automatic, depending on the question, of course.
Sure, and that's a good point. We're talking about this moment, depending on what kind of question.
Depending on the question.
Super important. What else is about questions? Yeah.
Why you do what you do, or why you say what you say.
Yeah. They can kind of challenge you to examine what's going on and why you do certain things. David, did you have something?
It helps me get past the tendency that my weakness, I want you to fix me. I want you to have the answer, because I don't really want to think about it.
Yeah. Wow. And that's kind of cultural with ICFC, right? Like, just tell me what to do.
I think it brings clarity, right? Somebody has to explain that more, or what do you really mean? Or what do you think about this, instead of saying to somebody, this is what you should do? Ask them a question, like, what do you think about?
Yeah.
There's a comment. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, so you're really trying to give them some guidance towards healing, but you're making them put it in their words.
Right. Yeah, it takes it out of your ball court and puts it in their ball court.
Because if I said to somebody, I think you should write them a letter and just explain your thoughts, they would say, no, I don't wanna write a letter, because you just told me to write a letter, right? It could happen that way. But you could say, like, well, what do you think about, you think that would work if you put your thoughts on paper, even if you don't send it to them, but you just clarify your thoughts, it could be a healing exercise.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Very good. Did you say there's a question?
There's questions lead to introspection and presence.
Yeah, they create dialogue with people. Don't you love a good talk? I love a good talk, especially if there's a glass of beer involved. Or a cup of coffee. I love a good back and forth. I hate shallow fellowship. Hey, how about them Broncos, man? Like, yeah, how about those guys? Let's talk about something different, I love good, engaging conversation. Shane came in my Airbnb this morning, and he just sat on the ground, and we talked for like an hour. I'm like, working, leave me alone, I'm working. But it was just a good interchange of some really good stuff.
Listening to my elders.
Yeah. But questions open up dialogue is what they do. They really do. And most of us appreciate when somebody asks us a good, thoughtful question that make us go inward. They examine our hearts. Jesus asked that guy at the pool, like, hey, do you want to get well? It's like an offensive question. Like, what do you mean, do I want to get well? I've been laying here for 40 years, of course. But he, it examined the man's heart. Like, what's happened to your heart? He wasn't sarcastic in it. He just asked a really good question, and he wanted the person take on agency in his life. That's what that question did. The guy's like, okay, guess if I want to get well, I better have some faith in you, and you know, God healed him. Less defensiveness, you know, again, that whole thing about, hey bro, you need to do this, or why aren't you doing this, you know, that whole piece of, it becomes against you, right? Like, my power card is you, you know, I'm gonna throw my power card down on you, you better do it if you wanna be a good Christian. It takes away all the defensiveness that we could have with one another, and it becomes a conversation, and it points people to God. Like, that's the cool thing, is good questions push the conversation back where it belongs. It's not between you and I, it's between you and God. My questions are geared to take you to God. And there's another one here, guys, really important. The direction of your question is the direction of people's thought. So when you ask a question, what you're doing is you're kind of pushing their thinking in the direction of your question. So if I ask you right now, what time is it? What would you do? You're going to look at your watch or your phone or whatever, right? My question caused you to go somewhere, okay? So here's one of my beefs I have with preachers. You might want to step out of the room for a second.
I got beef with preachers too.
One of the beefs I have with preachers is when they're trying to make a point and they'll say, like, let's say they're trying to talk about having quiet times, and they'll say, when was the last time you had a good quiet time? What's that question do to me? I feel defensive. It's sarcastic. It indicates that I'm having lousy quiet times. The direction of the question pushes me in a place where it's not very helpful. A different question would be, what is it when you have great quiet times? What excites you about those? Like, tell me about your most amazing quiet time you've ever had, or when you're on a good streak, what is that like for you when you're just like having quiet times every morning, and what's that like for you? Where does that push me? That pushes me toward the solution of the whole problem.
Right.
So be careful the kinds of questions you ask. You know, be careful that they're not shame-based. Generally speaking, we don't want to shame people. Maybe every now and then there's a place for that. There is in the Bible every now and then. There's a place for shame. It can kind of like wake people up. Okay, so there is a place for it, but generally speaking, shame is not a good thing to use with people. You know, so be careful when you ask questions. Like the direction of what you're asking, okay? The purpose of a man's heart is like deep waters, but a man of understanding will draw it out. I just love that. Questions just like draw people. You ever felt like your heart got drawn out with somebody? They're like, my wife does that sometimes. She'll ask me a question. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And then she'll ask the other question. I'm like, well, this happened today. Then she asks another question. I'm like, but I'm pretty disappointed. And all of a sudden, I'm crying. And I'm like, how do you do that, Jackie? Like, I'm the counselor guy, you're not supposed to be able to do that stuff. But she'll just ask me some questions, and then she kind of keeps going layer down to layer down to layer. And before I know it, we're having this like really connected talk with each other. And how did it happen? I didn't walk into the room thinking that. I'm like watching the baseball game over her shoulder. You know, that was supposed to be funny.
I got
I'm glad you did.
The game just finished.
One time I was watching Stanley Cup hockey on TV, and my daughter sitting next to me, and she started sharing some really deep stuff with me. And I'm looking at her, but I'm looking in the window to see the reflection of the game, and she caught me. So bad. So bad. Okay, I'm gonna just finish with one kind of question, and this will be it for the night. This is one of the most popular questions Jesus asked. I call them solution-focused questions. Jesus would ask questions that help people to solve their problems. So there was a time where Jesus is preaching, and he was such a good preacher that people were following him for days and not eating. Okay, that's a pretty good preacher, right? Like, they were out there, and he'd walk around to a new field, and they're like, okay, I'm going to follow him out to that new field. And it got to a point where the guys were like, Jesus, these people are gonna fall down and die if they don't eat. And so what's he say? He goes, you give them something to eat, right? He just goes, you do it then. And what happens when we get a challenge like that is we immediately figure out how it can't happen. So isn't that what they did? They're like, yeah, a year's wages can't do it, or what was it?
I was like, they wanted Jesus to do something. They were like, shouldn't we feed them, Jesus?
Yeah, yeah. He's like, yeah, you go ahead and do it. But then when he said, you go ahead and do it, they're like, yeah, but that would cost like a year's wages just to give them a little bit of bread, right? We always figure out ways we can't do it. You ever notice that about yourself? When you got a problem, you can figure out all the ways you can't get it solved. The guy next to you is like, oh, I can help you. But in our own hearts and minds, we don't do well with that. So he goes, you figure it out. And then he asked this really cool question. He goes, how many loaves do you have? Remember that? And I think it was it Philip or somebody said, well, there's a little boy over here with a couple of loaves and a couple of fish. Jesus asked the question to get them figuring out their resources. He goes, well, what do you got? What's available right now? What do you have at your disposal? And he said, go and see. I love this statement. What do you already have? So one of the things we help people with in any setting is a solution-focused approach. Like, what's available to help you solve this problem? Let's think solutions here. And then, of course, they're like, yeah, we found the kid. Here it is. Jesus goes, okay, everybody sit down. Get in groups of 50. Had some organization going on. And then he fed everybody, right? So here's what I think about solution-focused questions is it deals with our resources and our solutions that we have in life. So, well, how about that?
I guess you're done.
I just went too much. Wow.
It skipped ahead, yeah.
Did it really? Bad computer. Bad computer. Okay. So one of the things I do in my life is I think resources. I'm continually thinking about resources. When I was in the school setting, I tell people schools are resource-rich environments. There are resources everywhere in schools. But I've realized churches are the same way. So I always think in terms of what are the resources available? What are the resources in the church setting? Like, what are some of the resources we have?
Each other.
Who said that? We have each other. Like, we take it for granted, right? But we kind of like each other. Like, some of you guys have been around this thing for 40 years now, right? And you've seen a lot going on. You're like, why? We're on a committee, and this one woman who's not in a Christian church, she goes, why do you guys still come to these churches? And the biggest answer was, because of each other. Like, these are my best friends in the world. Like, I can't imagine a life without these people. So one resource we have is each other. Now, I tell people this, is I'm not enough for you. All the time I tell people that, especially when they're really serious problems. I just tell people, I'm not enough. I can be part of your solution. I can help guide you in some ways, but you got some other things you're going to need to access besides me. I want people to know that. I don't want people coming to me thinking I'm like the big answer guy. So I tell them often, I'm not enough for you. And what I'm doing is I'm putting it back on them to go find more resources. What are other resources we have besides each other?
Prayer.
What is that?
Prayer?
Prayer.
I like pushing that prayer.
So we get to talk to like the creator of the universe anytime we want, and he'll listen to us. Like, that's an amazing resource we have. Who else gets to do that? So prayer is another resource. What else?
Books and
Guys, books.
materials.
Speaking of books. So books. I tell people, listen, for $15, you can sit at the feet of an author who's an expert in an area and listen to their expertise in the area that you need help in. Right? It's like inviting the guy to your house for 3 hours and you just talk to him for 3 hours. You get to do it for $15 or $20 or whatever your book costs you. There's free stuff online. So we have resources in America, guys, man. Most countries in the world don't have what we have. We talk about this stuff in most countries, they're like, we've never heard this before. They just don't have resources. What else do we have in church?
Memories of how God has helped us before.
Say that again?
Memories of how God has helped us before.
Wow. Do you remember Jesus, at the end of John, the guys are out fishing, right? It's pretty cool, they're out fishing and Jesus walks up on the shore and he goes, hey guys, why don't you put your net over there, right? And Peter goes, oh my gosh, this is just like what happened back in Luke 3 or something. Peter just jumps in the water without any clothes on basically and just swims to Jesus. And he goes on shore with Jesus. And Jesus creates a fire. And it's really interesting. That's where Jesus did his little thing with Peter, like, hey, do you love me? Do you love me more than these? Remember that? It's really interesting. The only other place in the Bible that Jesus, or that the Bible talks about that charcoal fire is where? There's one other place that there's a fire.
Moses.
Cross?
Moses.
No, it's in the New Testament.
Before he went to the cross, in the
Yeah.
garden.
Yeah, remember Peter's in the garden warming his hands over a fire, and the little girl came up to him and said, hey, aren't you one of those
Where he
guys?
denied him.
Where he denied him. Jesus took him back to a place of grace with that fire. And he goes, remember how I forgave you back? I'm going to do it again. Taking people back to places of grace are powerful. You know, when people relapse in their sin, pornography or whatever, I often take them back to, what was it like when God solved that the first time around? Tell me about that. What was that like for you? What was the freedom you felt when he solved that problem for you? How did he do that? Taking them back to previous successes is powerful. It's one of the most powerful things we can do with people. God does it in the Old Testament a lot. Like he goes, hey, remember those ancestors you guys used to follow back in the day? Well, they're still pretty relevant today. And he talks about that. What else? What other resources do we have?
Faith. We can borrow each other's faith.
Yeah, Paul said that in Romans 1, I think. He said, I'm encouraged by our mutually shared faith. Like our faith is mutual. So when people are really hurting, your faith can actually kind of be their lifesaver, right? When they're really hurting. What other resources do we have? Let's see a couple in there we haven't talked about yet. Answers on the board. Who said that? Scriptures. Guys, who else in the world has a book? Like if I go to your church tomorrow and I open the Bible and I say, how many of you guys will do what the Bible says? Like, how many of you guys believe this stuff? You know what? Every arm goes like that. We have a book that we believe is the written word of God. And basically when we look at one another, we go, yeah, I'll do it. Who else has that? Nobody else has that kind of a stability foundation in their life. And it's not just a book of, it's not just like 27 bullet points God did. Like, okay, here's the 27 things to do. Get them all done. We're good to go. The Bible is like this nuanced, textured, amazing storybook. I mean, it's an amazing narrative, right?
Yep.
And when you show people, when you're good at it, and you can kind of, let's walk back to the story here with Sarah, and you took Sarah's faith or something. It's not just like God saying, okay, do what she did. It's just like this explosive, textured story of a woman's faith. We have that at our disposal. It's powerful. I'm not sure we use it like we used to. I'm not sure we do. Maybe you do in Anchorage. We don't in Denver the way we used to. Our fellowship used to be a lot of Bibles laying open, a lot of people talking, connecting their lives to the Word of God. So, think about that. What about the Holy Spirit? What do you guys think the Holy Spirit's role in all this stuff is?
Partner.
Counselor.
Yeah.
Ooh. What do you mean as a counselor?
Well, he is a part of God who is within us and knows us the deepest more than we know ourselves and can lead us and guide us if we listen.
He knows the mind of God.
It's the very mind of God. And where does he live?
Within us.
Like in our hearts. Oftentimes I ask people when we're kind of stuck, if I feel stuck, I'll just say, what does the Holy Spirit say to you about this topic? And you know what? Almost every time the person answers me with a really good answer. Like almost every time they go, well, because the Spirit of God speaks in our hearts. He lives there. Like, how has that happened? I don't know. That's like, but the Bible says when you become a Christian, like the Spirit indwells your heart. So he's got a voice. He speaks to you. Diana is so good at this stuff. And you guys, don't be careful when you hang out with Diana, okay? Just be careful because the Spirit might slip out a little bit there. It is dangerous. I've experienced her little spirit thing. I'm like, okay, enough of that. You know?
He's talking about the presencing practice, which I think we should put a plug in here right now. If we haven't done it before, or participate. Thank you, Tim.
So guys, think resources. In the church setting, think about what people have at their disposal. I almost always give people homework when I get done talking. I want them to go home and read something. I want them to go do something. I believe the time away from me is more important than even the time with me. So in my counseling practice, I always give them homework to do before we meet again. I believe in that. So give them jobs to do. Give them homeworks to go home and work on. And then I'm going to just finish up with, oh, somebody's trying to watch
Sorry.
Shane's trying to watch the ball game.
No, it's over.
He's looking in the window.
Yeah. Another reflection.
You don't know? No? All right, I'm going to end with this. So think resources and always think creative. Here's the last point I want to make. The last point I want to make is this. Problems that people have are not necessarily related to the solutions that they find. We often think if I can better understand the problem, then I can help solve it for you. And that's not always true. Matter of fact, it's rarely true. Solutions to our problems are rarely connected to how we got in that problem. I remember one time with a student, I was really getting into Sigmund Freud. I thought, I'm going to be Sigmund Freud to this kid, you know. And we started talking about his problems. And we started going down the toilet. I felt like I was a toilet thing. And the further we talked about his problems, our shoulders started getting really heavy. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, I thought, man, you're a mess, buddy. I don't think I can help you. Like, I was depressed. He was definitely depressed. I mean, I was trying to do this thing about I want to integrate and figure out all the little problems you got and how it all happened. And then I realized, like, no, the problem is the problem. The problem just is. How it got there is oftentimes not all that important. All we know is it's a problem, and this person's looking for relief and solutions. So there's a good story I'll end up with. It's the Japanese farmer story. You may have already heard this before, but if you haven't. So there's a Japanese farmer, and he's in this village on the ocean, and he's up on this hill tending to the rice fields. It's like a mile up from the village, right? And he's up there tending the rice, and he looks out in the ocean and he sees a tsunami coming toward his village, right? No cell phones, no time to run down to warn people. He sees this tsunami. So what's he do?
Makes a fire.
He does what?
Makes a fire?
Yeah, he lights his field on fire. The rice
that was
is
a guess, by the way. I didn't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the rice is burning up. All the people in the village are like, look, our field's on fire. We better go put it out. And they all run up the hill to put the fire out. And thus are saved, right?
Wow, that's cool.
It's an illustration of the solution to their problem had nothing to do with what was going on in the problem ways. And you think about Jesus and his creativity in solving problems. The guy would walk up and just stick his finger in people's ears. He walked up one time and he grabbed the guy's tongue and he pulled it out and he spit on it. He did. There was a couple of times he got on the ground and he spit on the ground and made mud, and then he just like rubbed his eyes. There you go. And one time the guy goes, oh, I just see trees walking around. He's like, oh shoot. Hold on a second. And he did it again. He's like, how's that looking? He goes, okay, it's better. I see people now. Super creative. Malchus's ear comes locked off. Jesus didn't look at the guy's ear and go, hey, how did that happen? Like, let's examine this. Who did it? Who did it? He didn't do that. He picks the guy's ear up and he's like, bing, puts it back on his head. He was all about creativity. He was amazing. He didn't just give in to the templated, here's how you do it. He's like, let me show you some things here, guys. So be creative. Think outside the box. Okay? So that's my spiel for tonight. Are there any questions or clarifications? Anything I can kind of like maybe help move this further along down the road for you? Yeah.
What are your small groups and counseling things like in a church? I've been a part of a church before that Celebrate Recovery. Is this similar to what y'all have?
Good question. Thank you. That's like a softball question
Yeah.
there. Can I answer that?
Yeah. No, actually, no.
So when I got my doctorate, they said, Tim, you got to do something with this stuff. Don't just get a doctorate and move on. Okay. So they kind of impregnated within us, like, do something, change your world. So at the time in our church, we had like these recovery ministries for purity issues, and I was struggling with some purity stuff, and I didn't like them. I wouldn't go to them. They're shame-based. I'll see all the brothers walking down to the basement after midweek. I'm like, I know where those guys are going. This is my social group. I didn't want to be that guy. So what I did, I started learning about all the different recovery ministries that I could figure out. And then this one thing happened to me in one of my classes. It was really interesting before I graduated. I went to this class called Contemplative Counseling. I thought it was going to be like pastoral counseling. And what it was all the religions in the world. They brought in a guest speaker every day of all the religions for 3 weeks. Some new guy every day for 3 hours. And I was super insecure. Like, I don't know anything about Muslim and Hindu. I don't know much about those. And I was the only guy in the class. There's 18 women and me. Most of the women were like burned out Catholics and stuff. They don't like religion anymore, and I'm like this conservative Christian guy. And so, but what I learned in that class was this. Since I couldn't like argue or talk about other people's religion, all I could say is, I got a guy named Jesus, and here's what he does. Here's what he said. And when I did that, I noticed people go like, really? What was that again? Like there was a respect, there was a simplicity to it. And I learned a great lesson in that class. I walked out knowing that if I just talk his talk and kind of watch him do his thing. So what I did is I developed a recovery ministry. I found 8 concepts that are common to all recovery. Things like forgiveness, community, denial, trust. These are things that are all common to any recovery ministry that's successful. Celebrate Recovery is like that. And what I did, I said, if these are all true, which I think they are, then we'll see Jesus doing them. So we developed 8 devotionals, watching Jesus do one of those each week. So instead of talking about the principle of forgiveness, which is great, we spend time in Luke chapter 7 watching Jesus forgive somebody. And there's a power in watching him do stuff that most people just talk about. So we say a person, not principles. So there's something about watching Jesus forgive a woman, or Jesus with trust, or Jesus with a community that we feel like is more powerful. So we develop these devotionals. People come in. It's for any person with any issue, anything. I don't care what you're dealing with. I didn't want to just, separate, okay, there's the drug guys, there's the porn guys, there's the bitter women over there. Sorry, Sarah. I didn't look at you, but I was tempted to, right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. They would have said that. You're gonna make me sleep on the street tonight. I didn't want to do that because I felt like, that's just, it doesn't give people dignity.
That's awesome.
Because this is our social setting that we live in. So we just open up to everybody. We don't make it, we don't hold them accountable to come or not come. They're allowed to come or not come. We make it safe and confidential. No one's allowed to know what we talk about in this group. We do these devotionals kind of like this, where every week we do one devotional that Jesus illustrates his thing. Okay, we have a book with it all. It's over there. And then we just get in small groups afterwards of 3 people each. And we do them men and women, just, it's a little bit more comfortable, I guess, not together. But we don't put people together for their problem either. If they want to, they can. If 3 guys that are, struggling with something, they can all get together. But they don't have to be for the same reason. But we do men and women. And then we have discussion time where we help people to go forward in what we just talked about. So if we talk about forgiveness, for example, the questions center around next week and going forward in your life, how does that work into your recovery? So those are like our personal times together, and that's it. And then we help people find programs for themselves, so everybody needs to have a book that they can read for their specific problem. So anyways, that's kind of like the down and dirty. We call it the recovery journey. And it's been really good. It's been really encouraging, really successful. And it's kind of cool because when people, every now and then people are like, this didn't help me much, Tim. And I'll just say, I'm really sorry. I wish it did. But you may want to talk to Jesus about that because we kind of stuck him in the middle of the whole thing. Like, we just make him like I felt like I wasn't smart enough to know how to do this ministry. So I just put the burden on his shoulders. Like, all right, I'll just put him in the middle of it. See what happens, So it's kind of similar to Celebrate Recovery. I went to some of their groups. They do some things different. They do principles, which are fine.
12 steps.
Yeah, they're kind of 12-steppy. I wasn't real big on the 12-steppy thing. And 12 steps has a real place for people and stuff. I didn't feel like it worked in the church setting as well. I felt like it was kind of onerous, kind of like, I don't want to say mean-spirited, but I don't know. There's something about it that just didn't leave dignity with people. So, but I'm not down on them. I mean, they do really good work. I think especially for people that are really knee-deep into their problem.
I love the fact that one of the things you mentioned was that people who are not a part of the church went, and that's one of the things that I loved about that Celebrate Recovery and in combination with the church, because it brought people from all over the place.
Yeah.
And then our small group discussions were great.
Yeah, they're amazing. I mean, they started off with 75% of the people that attended it were from their church, and after a couple of years, that had flipped over to like 75% of the people that came in were not members of the church. And I was like, ooh. So I learned a ton from those people. I really did. And yeah, so, and we tell people our ministry may not be suited for you. It may, we may not be enough. We can help in some ways, but you may also need some other more intensive work, other groups. So anyways, yeah, but it's a safe place to come to. Like, we're not allowed to tell people who comes, certainly not what they say, and we're not allowed to even share other people's sin or anything. I had an evangelist call me like, hey, how's so and so doing? I'm like, I don't know, ask him.
You're right.
Sure, so. Anyways, thanks for asking me. We'll plug there, yeah.
Kind of on the topic of recovery and everything, do you think there's a bigger success for people from external or internal motivations?
So for an individual, is it more important that they have external or internal motivation?
Yeah, if they want to get cleaner, they want to be clean.
Yeah. I would say external motivations can be really helpful short term. So we have guys that come I'm like, so why'd you come today? Like, well, my wife made me come. That's an external motivation, right? So it got them in the doors, but it probably won't keep them in the doors very long. Or it probably won't sustain the change. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So external can be really good, but an internal, obviously, for sustained change, it has to come from inside. I had a guy once, a really good friend of mine, he was just stuck in porn for a long time, and he would come to In Motion, then he wouldn't come, and he'd come, and he wouldn't come. And I'd get on him, and come on, bro. And then I didn't see him for a year, and then one time he walks in with his whole family. And they sat right in the middle of it all 9 weeks with his whole family there. I was like, okay. He had to kind of get to a point where he was ready to go, and he brought his whole family with him. So, yeah, I think they can both be helpful, but long term it's got to be internal, I think. great questions. I've never been asked that before. Thank you. That's a good question. Other questions you might have? Yeah.
So kind of listening and connecting to people, not necessarily in the church setting, but like say in a family unit and trying to connect to someone. How do you find a place of empathy and at the same time like trying to be vulnerable and stuff like that when someone's looking for a very specific response from you, like they want you to agree to their ideology or different value system, and how do you connect without while still kind of maintaining your anchor?
Yeah. And this in like a family context?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most difficult work we do as humans. You know, this idea of I can accept you, but not approve. So, like I would tell my kids when they go to college, I'd be like, guys, you're gonna go to college, I'm not gonna know what you're doing. By the way, I won't pay for you if I find out. You're doing crazy stuff. But you know, I always will accept you as my son. My son once told me this. We were arguing about Bible and stuff, and he went through a phase where he was an atheist and stuff. And he said something really interesting. He goes, Dad, when you don't agree with me, you don't accept me.
Yeah. Yes.
By this time he was like 20 years old, 22 or something. And that ran me over like a ton of bricks. Because what he had experienced in our Christian home was there's kind of a line to draw. There's kind of a, you all know where we're going on this family. Like, you know what we do here. We go to church and this is it. He knew that. And when he deviated from that because he thought differently than I did, he would sense, I don't accept you anymore. And his big sister is all, you know, sold out Christian person. So he felt very isolated. So so there's a difference between accepting somebody and approving of their choices.
Right.
And with our family, man, it is just like, it's essential. Hey, see you guys. Thanks so much for being here. Good luck. I expect to hear about a slam piano. Yeah, don't get hurt. Does that make sense? That idea behind acceptance but not approval? Here's the thing, guys. I think with our family, the thing is patient, lovingly allowing people to have space to be themselves. That's the very route to, I think that's the route to any changes they're going to make in a positive way. Is they've got to get to a place where you love them no matter what, and they get themselves out there. That's the painful part. They put themselves out, and you see everything that's difficult. They've got to be there before they're going to make any kind of change. And then they may not change. And Jesus just loved people. He just did. So with my son, man, it became a real challenge because it was ingrained in me, like what I wanted for his life, right? And I had to really back up and, whew. So yeah, I hope that helps.
I think so.
Yeah, we can talk some more later if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Yes.
So when you talk about having creative solutions, I wonder if you have any creative solutions for an interpersonal situation where you have somebody that all they want to do is keep talking about what happened, the infractions, but absolutely no steps for next. And so at some point you can't keep talking about that anymore, but like how do you get, and then when you have a non-responsive person too that won't hear or listen or communicate, how can you be creative there?
Yeah. So the first person you just mentioned, it sounds like, there's a really good book called What Happened to You. It's written by Oprah and Dr. Perry, I think, Dr. Richard Perry. It's a trauma expert that she had on her show like 30 times or something. And they wrote a book together, kind of like an interview between the two of them. And the title of the book is What Happened to You? And that's the question they ask people. When somebody is stuck in the past with trauma, usually what's going on, I can't speak to it because I don't know this person, but they have what they call trauma bonds. So when you're traumatized as a kid and it doesn't get resolved, and then you come to church and then you hit trauma in the church, you bond those two things together. And that's where they get stuck. They get stuck in this cycle of they can't seem, so logic doesn't get them out of it. I'm working with a guy right now like that. You know, I've known him for 20 years. For 20 years now, I know where our conversation is going to end up. He's really angry. Some people hurt him years ago, and his anger is valid, but he can't seem to move. And we got together the other day, and I said, "What happened to you? Like, what was it like when you grew up?" His mom was borderline personality disorder, tried to kill herself. His dad died early. I mean, a lot of trauma in his life. I'm like, oh, okay. That's where our work is. It's not trying to resolve your past with the church. I'm really sorry about that. I hate that happened to you. But the real work for him is the stuff that happened when he was younger. So they bond together with their childhood trauma oftentimes. So that's why people keep cycling through. And our logic it's not creativity that's going to solve that. And it's certainly not our logic. We can't explain away like what happened. Like, yeah, somebody yelled at you. Well, what they're really thinking, you know, we can't do that to people. So something like that, getting them into some professional help might be really good if they can. But, you can still get them to write, to journal. Like, can you go home and write in your notebook what happened to you? And if you want to, share it with me. Even a little bit of things that we can do with people can start opening the heart up. Get them to examine something. Maybe she hadn't looked at it for a long time.
Is that
What
similar?
if they're not like responsive at all or don't want, like if you have two people that are trying to figure it out and one won't cooperate, how can the other person move on? At some point they just can't keep on battling with someone that doesn't want to cooperate.
Yeah, I just was involved in one of those. Paul says, as far as possible, be at peace with all men. So the other person's response doesn't dictate how I respond. So I can't make them forgive me, or I can't make them, I can only, even in our grief groups, that's what we do. We believe in grief that the reason we don't grieve well is because we have blocks in our relationship with the person that we lost. So with my mom, she's super controlling, all that stuff, which I never could work out with her. And then also I stole money from her when I was a kid. I gave her the finger behind her back to make my friends laugh at me, things like that. We never resolved those issues. So and then she died. So the theory is that because I have unresolved problems with her, that I'm not going to grieve well, because those things still sit right in front of me. So in our grief group, we write letters of forgiveness and an apology. Like, I apologize to my mom in my letter. Mom, I'm really sorry about these things I did. We never resolved it. And also, Mom, I forgive you for your controlling nature, and you'd never liked my church and said bad things about my church. But I get it, I forgive you. And we believe that when you wipe those things off the table, then you can grieve properly. So again, it's going as far as we can go. I can't access my mom anymore. I can't go talk to her somewhere. She's gone. But I can write a letter, and from my side of things, I can do what I have to do. And I can walk away in peace. And that's what I had to do with these two women that just wouldn't, is they had to walk away in peace with each other. I've said I'm sorry, I've meant it, that's all I can do. I'm like, yeah, that's all you can do right now. Somebody said the other day, Paul wrote a whole letter of Philippians. He thinks the letter was written because of those two women.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what were their names?
Euodia and Syntyche.
Yeah. Paul's like, would you women, I mean, think about it. He had to include them in the scriptures. Like, they must have had something going on where it was well known as, like, people were talking about it in other churches. Paul heard about it. he probably got to intervene and got beat up on it. I've jumped in the middle of girl fights before. They're not easy. Not good. Don't ever do that.
The men just killed themselves.
What's that?
The men just killed
I know, they
themselves.
just fight and get it over with. Go get a beer afterwards.
Is that bonding thing similar to the thing I've heard where kind of all your griefs are connected? So like, you know, they like not really pile on each other, but they sort of trigger each other. Like,
Sure. So one of the things we do a history of grief where we have people write down griefs in their life and then what did it do to you over those years.
Mhm.
So when my dog died, I was like 9 years old, my basset hound, Heathcliff. He got run over by a car and I found him. And we, oh, thank you. And so we buried him and 5 boys in the family. We weren't allowed to talk about it. Nobody was ever allowed to say anything about it. We just buried him, done. So I learned that you don't talk about grief.
Mhm. Right.
So when grandma dies, nope, we're not gonna talk about that. So yeah, we do, they all get kind of connected because we never do much about them.
Right.
Yeah, so we help people to break that whole cycle,
Mm.
you know, with our grief groups.
Huh.
So yeah, it's interesting. Grief disciples us actually. Other questions? These are really good questions. Okay, guys, listen, thanks again. I'll be around tonight if you want to talk some more. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you tomorrow morning at church. Yay!
All right.
Thank you.